And greetings. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I'm Steve Deace. One last day here in beautiful Dallas before I head back home to, I guess it's beautiful Des Moines, I guess. Todd Erzin, Aaron McIntyre back there in the studio, and I look forward to connecting again with you guys tomorrow for the Deace Group. Coming up on today's show, we haven't had a chance to do one of these yet with all the events going on so far this year with the inauguration and everything else, but we have our very first end of the month Feedback Theology Thursday. Questions and comments that have come up as we have continued our study of Paul's letter to the church in Rome, one of the most challenging and maybe the most important epistle of the New Testament. And we're going to get to some of those. I know I've let you guys see the questions we're going to be getting to. There's a couple doozies there. I'm looking forward to this conversation coming up next hour. Gentlemen, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. This is the most eclectic and probing one yet. It really goes into some places that I don't think are as predictable as, and I don't mean that as a pejorative. I think some of the past ones are what you kind of would expect getting out of the gate with this kind of thing. I think this thing is getting, really digging down deep now.
Yeah, I think this is actually the first one we've done since September or October, so it'll be interesting.
Oh, wow.
So we've covered a lot of ground since that time, so it'll be interesting to hear from the audience, see what their takes are on various chapters of Romans.
What I've really enjoyed, too, is I've gotten lots of questions, and we just can't serve that wine before it's time yet. I mean, this is such a smart audience, where what we've covered so far, begs certain questions. And I got lots of people sending in questions. Well, does that mean this is true or that is not? And I'm like, we can't get to those questions yet because Paul's going to address that in the chapters coming up, but that shows the synapses are firing and some critical thinking is going on. So I appreciate that. Speaking of critical thinkers, our old friend, Dr. Pierre Kory, is going to join us here at the bottom of the hour. He's part of a new movie, including with now Secretary of HHS, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We're going to preview that film and why you want to check it out coming up at the bottom of the hour. But let's get started, as we always do, with Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by the Epstein files are finally here, and you won't believe who's on the list. I couldn't resist. But Attorney General Pam Bondi said on Fox News last night,
I think tomorrow, Jesse, breaking news right now, you're going to see some Epstein information being released. A lot of flight logs, a lot of names, a lot of information.
She also tamped expectations.
200 victims, 200. So we have over 250, actually. So we have to make sure that their identity is protected and their personal information.
Influencer brothers Andrew and Tristan Tate, who are charged with human trafficking in Romania, left for the U.S. after authorities lifted travel restrictions imposed as part of the case. Chief Justice John Roberts on Wednesday paused a court-imposed midnight deadline that would have required the Trump administration to release $2 billion in frozen foreign aid, a goal the government has claimed it's unable to meet. The emergency appeal marks the first time President Trump's executive actions challenged in court have reached the nation's highest court. Trump held his first cabinet meeting yesterday.
European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. And they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president.
This morning, Trump announced 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, saying they're still not doing enough to secure their southern and northern borders, respectively. Trump also announced another 10% tariff on China for its continued production of fentanyl. Dodging a bullet update, here's Minnesota Governor Tim Walz on a hot mic at the Minnesota State Capitol this week.
I see the pundits on TV. What's wrong with the Democratic Party? What's wrong is our country's being stole by fascists and Nazis.
According to the New York Times, the percentage of Republican men who agree that women should return to their traditional roles increased from 28% in May of 2022 to 48% in November of 2024. Among Republican women, there was an increase from 23% to 37%. More Democrat men and women also agree with that sentiment, but only slightly. Fewer than 1 in 5 Democrat men agree women should return to traditional roles. 1 in 10 Democrat women agree. A 40-year-old man was arrested after police say they found a number of explosives at a Colorado Tesla dealership. The latest incident in a string of apparent protests and violent acts, or at least attempted acts, against Tesla CEO and Doge leader Elon Musk. A man who goes by the name Lucy Grace Nelson was charged with explosives or use of incendiary devices, felony criminal mischief, and criminal attempt to commit felonies, according to a news release from the Loveland, Colorado Police Department. And finally, Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa were found dead in their home in New Mexico, along with their dog. That's according to a press release from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office. He was 95 years old. Their causes of death have not been confirmed, but foul play is not suspected.
Well, I thought that you were dead.
Hell, I even thought I was dead. Till I found out it was just that I was in Nebraska.
Hackman's performances in such films as The French Connection, Hoosiers, Unforgiven, and The Firm elevated character roles to leading man levels. Hackman lived in Santa Fe in recent decades with Arakawa, a former classical pianist, largely staying out of the public eye. Hackman had 3 children, whom he shared with his late ex-wife, Faye Maltese, who died in 2017. And that's what happened while we were away.
Aaron, do me a favor. Get that chart on gender roles. Have it handy, because I want to harken back to it here in a minute after I talk about our friends over at Relief Factor. It's not just about quantity of life, but about quality of life as well. And if you are just determining that the daily achiness, stiffness, soreness is just a part of the existence I'm going to live now, that might be true, especially as we get advanced in years. You know, as we just heard about the great actor Gene Hackman, who lived all the way to 95. But there's eventually a moment that we fulfill the 100% death rate. It also could be true that it's too early to give that up, and Relief Factor could be your answer to figure out which side of that equation you're on. Now, no guarantee here. It can be the solution. It's not the ultimate solution, but it's a pretty darn good one. Because over the years, over 1 million people have tried the 3-week quick start from Relief Factor. 70% of them saw such great results in 3 weeks or less that they stuck with the product long term. So if you want to try this drug-free supplement created by physicians who can prescribe drugs that goes right after the inflammation in your joints, that's usually the cause of your chronic pain. And that's that manifestation of that achiness and stiffness and soreness we were just talking about. It just costs $20 to find out if you don't see a difference in your pain threshold in 3 weeks or less. What do you got to lose for just $20? Go to relieffactor.com. Again, head over to relieffactor.com. All right, before we get to the gender roles chart, let's talk quickly about the Epstein files that may be released today. It sounds like the first wave of what we're going to get are flight logs. Now, that's not a guarantee if you were on those flights. That's not a guarantee by any stretch that you were involved in, human trafficking, that you went there, got your freak on, probably, potentially, with a young woman against her will, underage, and just became part of Epstein's blackmail material operation that he was accumulating on that island. But it's a good start in terms of narrowing his, or maybe confirming is a better word, guys, confirming his circle of influence and exactly who's on that list and who he was dealing with. At the very least, it does that. At the very least, it puts some people on notice. We coming. At the very least. And that level of suspicion, I think, will come with a societal price in and of itself. But what do you guys think?
Haven't we already gotten some flight logs from Jeffrey Epstein's plane before? Haven't we already gotten some of these? So
there have been some.
I'm unclear what exactly is new or groundbreaking about what's allegedly coming out today. But again, more transparency, the better. I'm not holding my breath. You gotta show me.
Yeah, I'm stuck here. There are obviously going to be names with a lot of money that will be very, very litigious. And a combination of what's going on with Doge to try to save the taxpayers' money and what Trump already went through himself within the courts. You know, you can just see Pam Bondi, whose nature is to be, fairly freewheeling and not be afraid of a good quip, being very, very careful with her language. They are obviously worried that this thing could get out of control in either direction.
Well, they all need to be worried about their own base, because the amount of MAGA influencers that are ginning up their hardcore supporters, that this is their job and they have to do this. That is not, frankly, let's just keep it real here, okay? But let's face it, the MAGA social influencer base, by and large, has not done much since it first emerged in the shadows of the 2016 election, and it's only grown from there. It is not really, it's rarely, let's put it this way, it has rarely taken the approach of saying back to the Trump administration or the Trump campaign, we can do better than this. It is rare. Is that fair that it's rarely taken that tact? It's rarely done that. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And most of the time, the tact has been when they do something, they know their base is like their base, that our base, it's our base too, if we're being honest. Okay. So for the most part, so when Trump and his campaign and his team do something they know the base would like is to blow that thing up into smithereens. When they are doing something they suspect the base won't like, just to ignore it and act like it's not there. Is that kind of fair about what the political media ecosystem has been like
Basically.
on the right?
Yeah.
In the Trump era. Is that fair? Okay.
Basically. Yeah.
So we're seeing something really rare right now. Really rare. And that you are seeing MAGA influencers preemptively going after Pam Bondi, preemptively going after Anna Paulina, the congresswoman, who also are going, Anna Paulina was going at Pam Bondi earlier this week. That is not something we have typically seen, which is this essentially a not so subtle signal is being sent to the departments of the Trump administration that would actually then fulfill his executive orders on this. Do your damn jobs. Our base, this is one area where our base is expecting you to deliver. So I think I don't know what will become of that, but it's a new dynamic, guys, right? It's just not something we have typically seen in this era of the ascendancy of Trump as a brand in politics.
Yeah, I'm not arguing against it. But is what you're talking about? Is it sustainable because it's principled? Are they going out of their way for this merely because it's salacious and this is more entertainment than it is governing? I don't know the answers to that. Again, I'm not arguing against it. It's just you saw Pam Bondi. She's like blinking SOS with her eyes. Something is not right about all of this.
We'll see. I think that might be going too far, but I love that analogy, so I'll allow it to stand. All right, Aaron, you have that chart?
Yeah.
All right, I want to call this chart up because it is both the most encouraging trend line that I think is happening in our current culture right now, but it also is the most revealing of truly where we are culturally at the exact same time. To me, I think this chart says three things. Number one, and in no uncertain order, I think this chart indicates that we can't outrun the old magic. As much as we try, we can't. And eventually, and when I say we, I mean humanity, eventually sometimes takes multiple generations. Sometimes it takes the end of a particular culture, era, or civilization. But when we get especially stubborn about trying to do exactly that, trying to outrun the old magic, the laws of nature and nature's God. But eventually, as one of my old radio mentors, Jan Michelson, used to tell me, when you break the natural law, it ends up breaking you. And you see that here. You see one group of people who are more likely to be predisposed to accept sanity and reality as a thing, finally coming to grips with that fact. And in the last couple of years, that is an incredible surge of that trend line. But on the other hand, you're seeing that another group of people who believe that they are their own reality. They can reshape reality. They can science the bleep out of this, like Matt Damon's character says in the movie The Martian. That they can conjure truth, as I've described it in the past. You are by and large seeing they're going to double down, triple down, quadruple down. So the fact that we are seeing on our side, and if we're the people that claim that we're the side of moral absolutes, we're the side of objective and transcendent truth, then the onus is on us. The standard, the higher standard should be placed upon us. And you are seeing there very precipitous growth where that is concerned. And that to me is an incredibly positive trend line. But here's point number one in terms of great revealing things. These two cultures can't live together. I mean, they just cannot live together. If you're not in favor of traditional gender roles, then I guess vis-a-vis, gentlemen, that automatically means you're in favor of what? Non-traditional gender roles. Yeah. Does anybody know what the hell those are? No. And that's the point. It's whatever you want it to be. Ye be like God. You decide. Ye be like God, knowing good from evil. You decide. You speak truth. You create. I will ascend. I will be like the Most High. These cultures can't coexist. And they won't. I'm just telling you, they will not. They will not coexist for the long term. They will not do so. They won't. It won't happen. Now, how long the short term is, I don't know. I'm not God. I'm not a transcendent being. And, you know, 1,000 years is not like a day to me. Okay? So, you know, short term could be a generation. I'm pretty confident it won't be longer than that, though. Especially with this trend line continuing. You rear children in the one trend line, and then you either don't or rear a fewer amount of children in the other one. That's a head-on collision, baby. Coming to a country and a culture near you. So that's number one. All right? These cultures can't coexist for the long term, and they won't. Number two, though, you can still see that the men are trending ahead of the women, even on the right. And it's dramatic on the right. There aren't that many men on the left. There's boys who can shave. And to be honest, we don't have that many men on the right, but we have more than they do. And we talked a little. This kind of reminds me a little bit about the poll from last week, which showed young women in Gen Z were way outpacing the men and identifying as rainbow jihad. I mean, the young men getting more sane, the young women getting less so. That's going to come to a head as well. But even here on the right, you can see the number with the lagging indicator of the women. That's still greatly encouraging overall. But the lagging indicator of the women indicates it's going to take many more years to undo the damage of third wave feminism. That's just where we are. You know, I once weighed over 400 pounds. I didn't get there overnight, and I wasn't going to lose 150 of those pounds overnight either. All right. So, you know, we're facing a generational whirlwind there. And so even on the side of sanity and reality, the women are a lagging indicator. So that's the second thing that trend line and chart says to me. The third thing that chart says to me, in terms of revealing things, is what a complete and colossal failure the church has been. Aaron, put that chart up there one more time for me, if you don't mind. Because it's the bottom half of this chart here, guys. That the modern evangelical church has spent much of the 21st century obsessing over. Reaching Karen in the suburbs. Now, at your local uplifting and hope-filled Christian music station, she might be known as Margaret, right, Aaron? They always have a different name, right? You know? Mm-hmm. The name on the board of who our target audience is, yeah. Right? Okay.
There's Linda. Linda is one. And I'm serious about that. That's literally a name of an archetype of a target audience for Christian radio is Linda. I'm not just making that up.
Yes, correct. So reaching the suburban Karen has been the goal of modern American evangelicalism for the entirety of the 21st century. Basically, this is the church growth movement, the church of Rick Warren, Bill Hybels, and Joel Osteen. And the goal was they were the decision makers now. They were. So you had to reach them. So the music stations the Christian music had to be catered to them. The Christian the church services had to be catered to them. The music, the worship styles had to be catered to them. The sermons had to be catered to them, okay? Mom's busy. Mom's thinking, how am I going to get the kids out of the nursery? And we've got another service coming in, and we got traffic. And, you know, the way a women's brain works, they think 10,000 things at once. Men kind of just think one thing at a time, all right? And so the service has got to move, man. The service has got to move, okay? Got to get those kids in and out of the nursery. You know, the things need to be efficient. Operate the way a mom does. The whole thing has been all about reaching that woman on the bottom half of that chart for the entirety so far of this century. And you can see from that data, it's been a colossal failure, a complete and total failure. Well, let me rephrase that. Unless the goal was to divorce ourselves from the controversies that teaching the whole counsel of God will create, and then really divorcing ourselves from the controversies that then not only teaching the whole counsel of God, but then asking the people sitting in the pews to apply it to their daily lives and the world around them will create all the more. If that was the goal, if the goal was to create a corporatized, spaded, and neutered church, where we peddled wares, we had Pottery Barn motifs, we had all kinds of really expensive vehicles with Bush Cheney bumper stickers and Jesus fish on the out there on the bumper. If that was the goal, all right, if that was the goal, plankton Christianity, the most shallow part of the food chain we could get to, then tremendous success. All right, you did it. You did it. You did it. Elf said, you got it. You nailed it. Okay. You nailed it. Now, I do think that was actually the goal, because that's where I think this crap comes from, the pit of hell. But I don't think most of the people peddling that was their goal. I just think they got deceived into thinking that there was a way. They're not the first people to do this, the men in the pulpit. They're after their father Adam. He also thought there was a way. There was a way to not have to directly confront the devil. So he stood there with his hands on his naked hips while his wife was deceived on behalf of humanity and did not a darn thing. I think that's as men, we want that message. We want to be told, yes, you mean I don't have to marry you and provide for you and protect you, and you'll give me the sexual release and gratification I want? I'm in. You mean no responsibility? I'm in. Take it from someone who's raised now a grown man and two grown women. Men and women, folks, they're a lot different. They're a lot different. And men especially will live up, and I don't care if that man is 18 months old or 180 years old, he will live up or down to the expectation level you set for him every single time. Every single time. And so we feminized everything, made the wife the decision maker, and the men were like, yes. Like that gift from Napoleon Dynamite. Yes, I don't have to lead. I don't have to make decisions. I don't have to take punches. I don't have to do my gig. Fantasy football forever. Listen, I've been playing fantasy football for 30 years. I love it. It's a nice leisure pursuit. You know when I get to my fantasy team? After I put 12 hours of work in a day. That's when I get to my fantasy team. That's the way it's supposed to work. Shouldn't be I'm out in the church lobby talking my fantasy football team with the guys. That's not how this works. All right? It's backwards. But the church conditioned this. We want beta men. And all it did was made the men completely complacent and made the children anywhere from disinterested to scornful of their parents' faith. So here we are. Congratulations. You went after that Karen and for a generation. And all you got out of it was in the last election, that's who voted to put people with your belief system in prison. And 9 out of 10 of them believe in something called non-traditional gender roles. Whatever the literal hell that means, no one knows because you're not supposed to. It's supposed to be amorphous because ye be like God. This was never going to work. But they were counting on the fact you were so dumbed down you wouldn't read anything in the Bible about what's called headship. You'd never read it. Because they didn't teach it to you anyway. They taught you verses out of context. Like they took the one uplifting verse of the book of Jeremiah, didn't teach the rest of the book. And that became like every homeschooled kid's graduation life verse for EVs. That's a symbol for American evangelicalism in this generation. And since we're supposedly the sola scriptura people, that matters quite a bit. We're one of the key conduits from which people access and understand and even know what's in the Word of God. But we chose not to teach it. Because if we did, Karen might get offended and not come, and she controls the checkbook and runs the budget. She's the decision maker. Well, that was a colossal failure because we can't go against the natural law in the church any more than the unbelievers can. Can't do it in the church either. The Creator set the creation upon headship. What is that? The man is the head of the home. Now, headship is not authority. God is the authority. The man is to model what is known as servant leadership. Before asking his wife to submit to him, he must demonstrate that he has submitted to a righteous and holy God who can cast his soul into hell for all eternity if he does not. And will, as a matter of fact. Upon setting that example of servant leadership, the man then earns the respect of his wife, who then submits to him because she's not really submitting to him. She's really submitting to God because she's watched submission modeled through him. And then the children, upon seeing that mutual submission, but that submission is mutual in a chain of command. First, the man sets the responsibility, sets the tone of the home, and he submits to the father. And then the wife, seeing that example fulfilled, submits to him. And then the children, seeing those examples being simultaneously fulfilled, submit to the parents. And that's how we pass on the faith. And that's how it was done before there was a transcendent institution known as the church. And that's how it's been done when we were settling frontiers and churches were 100 miles away and we had traveling ministers. And that's how it was done. We were hiding out from the Muslims in the caves of Cappadocia. That's how it's been done for centuries. That's why we're here. Because that's really the heartbeat of the church, not a building. It's that. But that's not what we did. That's not what we did. We went after Linda and Karen and Mildred instead. We were smarter than God. And after all, this is such a complicated and complex generation that unless we add our own little fine-tuning to God's message and apply our own special frosting to God's cake, by and large, no one would dare sample it. I mean, God could not be successful without us. He needs our way of doing things. And now we're in a position where, frankly, in the political class, the political, let me tell you where this return to gender roles did not come from, folks. It didn't come from the churches. For every Moscow, Idaho, there's 50, okay? There's 50 saddlebacks, guys. It didn't come from the churches. This recent resurgence of, we got to get back to sanity here, it came from natural instincts in the culture. People just went up against the natural law. The political right is ahead of the church. That's not good. We don't want political organizations and movements leading moral crusades. They can't. Invariably, they'll make political calculations. Moral crusades have to be based in the only transcendent institution God gave to the earth, the church. But it's not there right now. And it won't be until it gets the order right. You have to go after the men. And now that's the young men. They're the ones fathering the children and marrying the women. Go after the young men. Teach them what it means to be a servant leader. You will then reach the wife and the children. That has been the order for 2,000 years. You're not smarter than God. I don't care how many books you sold. I don't care how many campuses you're multi. You're wrong. You're wrong. And worldly success is not a direct correlation to kingdom significance. You're wrong. And one way that this will be a moment and not a movement is if the church does not course correct right now. Like in the next 6 months, a few years. Because invariably, people without that foundation, without that cornerstone, invariably our sins will find us out. And you know what? That sanity stuff was great, but I got desires. And the dog will return to its own vomit. In other words, if you're a pastor in this audience, do your job. Do your job. All right, back here on the Steve Deace Show, and we are undergoing a radical transformation, at least we hope we are, in terms of American public health policy. The first and the biggest domino to fall is now official. It still sounds weird to be saying this, but we're happy to be saying it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is your new Secretary of Health and Human Services. Now, still to come, Jay Bhattacharya, Francis Collins' old job at NIH, Marty McCarry over at the FDA, Dr. Weldon at CDC. Those appointments are still to come, and then the transformation will be full on. So what are we transforming from? What's the big picture here of what's happened in the last generation or so? Well, that's not coincidentally the name of a new movie called The Big Picture, Life Inside the Grid. And one of the main figures in that film is also someone that we've been pleased and honored to have on our show a few times over the last few years, because he's been one of the OG doctors out there on the front lines during the COVID era. It's good to see Dr. Pierre Kory yet again, brother. How are you?
Hey, Steve. Great to be here. Good to see you.
So let's start with the title of the film itself. What is the big picture? What are we looking at here?
Yeah. I mean, here's how I think of that title, The Big Picture, is that it's a movie. I don't want to sound too crazy or whatever, but my understanding is that the world that I thought I lived in didn't really exist. And it was really somewhat manufactured for you. Like what you thought, what you believed, what you were told as part of a little bit of a movie script, right? So it's very controlled. The information system and sphere is very controlled. And so then so are our thoughts and actions, right? So when you think of the best definition of propaganda that I've ever heard is a story or a message to get you to think or act in a certain way. And that is the purpose of propaganda, right? And a form of propaganda is advertising, right? So advertising sends you messages to buy a certain product, but they use propaganda to get you to think and do a lot of stuff. And I have never seen, or I don't think I understood how much propaganda rules our lives. And it turns us into kind of almost into a Truman Show, because what we think, what we believe, and what we do, we're being influenced by outside factors, almost like in a movie. Right. And so we're almost like following a script that someone else is writing. And so maybe I took your question too far, Steve, but that's one way in which I read that title.
No, and my oldest daughter, Anastasia, is listening. The Truman Show is one of her all-time favorite movies, so I got some dad points with that, so thank you.
Good.
You know what? Let's take a stab, Dr. Kory, at the big picture. Let me throw one set of data at you and then a scenario, okay? So in 1900, the average lifespan in America was right around 46 years old exactly, okay? In 1900, all right? In 1985, the average lifespan in America increased to just over 73. Okay. And so from 1900 to 1973, we have a few or 1985, I should say, we have a few notable advancements in human society. All right. Number one, we've got electricity and indoor plumbing and gas is becoming standard in every city, dwelling, urban area, home in America, which greatly cuts down on the amount of bacteria, the amount of infection, etc. Okay. Things like antibiotics become standard also in cutting down on the amount of infection and antibiotic. Okay. So we have a civil innovation like plumbing, civil engineering, what I just mentioned, medical, advancement as well, like antibiotics. So those are major contributing factors, despite 2 world wars. Keep in mind, Dr. Kory, we had 2 world wars, and the Spanish flu happened between 1900 and 1985, and the life expectancy in the country almost doubled during that period of time. In 1986, Reagan signs into law the exemption of liability for vaccine manufacturers, okay? So from 1900 to 1985, life expectancy improves from 46 to 74 or 73. And then from 1986 until last year, life expectancy only went from 73 to just about 78, just under 78. Now, part of that is there's only so much room for growth, right? These are mortal cells, okay? So we weren't going to see the same kind of explosive growth, but you're now asking me to take about 80 shots since 1986 that you were not asking me to take in 1985, okay? And it would seem to me that the risk-reward ratio here, Dr. Kory, ought to be, I should receive more benefit from this than 4 extra years of life, and usually the back end of life, when life is frankly the least enjoyable and the most trying for people. And so I'm taking on all this risk and that's assuming all the shots work and are safe. Right. That's right. Before we even itemize them individually, but collectively they all work and they are all safe. I'm taking about 70 more shots, or being asked to, since 1986. To get an additional just under 4 years of life, but on the back end of life, when the quality of life is the absolute lowest. Explain why anyone would sign up for that public policy at all if it was laid out to them that way.
I mean, you're not presenting a really attractive option there, right? I mean, the benefits seem low. And by the way, you just said it, Steve. You're oversimplifying and overstating the benefits as if that gain of 4 years would be solely due to this explosion in vaccines. We know that's not true. But no, that's the thing. Anything you do in medicine, right, is supposed to be fully informed consent of the risks of the intervention, the benefits of the intervention, and the alternatives. People forget about that. It's not just risks and benefits, it's alternatives. And when you talk about the benefits of the vaccine, so you just gave the best, that's what we call, so when we talk to patients, sometimes we'll say, this is the best case scenario, this is the worst case scenario. So you really want to try to cover the perspective to fully inform someone to make a decision. You just presented the best case scenario for the vaccines are 4 extra years of life at the end of life, right? And I think that's way too much of the best case. The worst case, which you didn't bring up, is what about you talked about Bobby. What about the epidemic of chronic disease, which for some reason coincidentally seems to have started to explode? Wait, what year was that again, Steve? What year did you say? 1986, right? You see these inflection curves. Inflection curves, epidemiologic inflection curves of incidence rates of some of the most devastating diseases you can possibly imagine. Do you know what it's like for parents of an autistic child who needs total care? And then you see these children as they grow older into their 20s and 30s, and the parents are getting older and they have a child that needs 24/7 supervision. And then the parents start talking about their fears of when they get too old to care for them, what's going to happen to their child. Nobody can take care of an autistic kid like a parent can. You know, the love, the devotion, the attention, the knowledge of what makes that child calm and happy. You know, I'm going off on a tangent, but that chronic illness epidemic is so devastating. And Bobby has been so pointed and so powerful in his messages, and that is his goal and his mission. And, you know, we all have to pretend that it wasn't the vaccines that did it, or some of us have to more than others. But let's, you know, all of the things that are poisoning us, right? It's not just the pharmaceutical industry with their vaccines. There's lots of stuff, food, water, air, everything. But those vaccines are incalculably harmful in terms of the epidemic of chronic illness. And so just going back to risk, benefits, and alternatives, like you didn't present it well and you presented it best case. I mean, the most realistic case is it would be insane to accept a whole fleet of vaccines for diseases that literally stopped being deadly even before the vaccines were invented, because they were from things that you talked about. Hygiene, water sanitation, food quality, all of those things exploded our life expectancy and our health. It wasn't the vaccines, and we know that epidemiologically, but everyone pretends that they're so critical to survival and health, and it's the opposite, unfortunately, is true, and you know that.
Aside from greed and nefarious motivations, the noble lie that alternative that I can come up with, and tell me if you can come up with one better, is that to some degree, these things collectively, epidemiologically, if you look at society as a whole, to some degree, they have some level of value they have found. And therefore, because of that, they're just not going to allow the underbelly of this, the exceptions of rising rates in autism, peanut butter allergies that never existed when we were kids, this kind of stuff.
Yep.
All right, none of us knew what a celiac disease were, okay, when you and I were growing up, okay? Because of that, they're just lying about those because the overall epidemiological portfolio is a net positive, and so therefore it's utilitarian ethics. The good of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one, okay? And your 1 out of every 36 autistic kid is frankly just not, statistically significant because you're just animals, you're just numbers on a page, you're not human beings with a soul. So we don't have to consider those individual maladies and exceptions and treat you with dignity and worth. We're just running a flow chart here. To quote the great prophet Bob Seger, feel like a number. That's all you are, man. You're just a social security number. To me, that's the noble lie. That's the only noble lie that I can come up with to explain why they've done business this way, unless we're just talking sheer greed and, really nefarious stuff.
Yeah. Again, you're being kind. The greed and corruption is a huge part of it. And I think that fuels that noble lie that you talked about, right? So this purported benefit that it's helping us, we know that is actually, I'm going to tell you, that's scientifically false. The benefits of vaccines, as we just talked about, are far outweighed by its harms. The benefits are negligible, right? So you've seen some of those really compelling graphs where you see like mortality rates of certain childhood infectious illnesses and how they were plummeting throughout the first half of this century, and they were near nil before vaccines for that disease were ever introduced or expanded, right? So the benefits of them in many cases are literally near nil. And so this noble lie that they're good for us just on its face doesn't stand up. And then as soon as you start to elucidate the harms, which by the way, are constantly attacked, that is a mass propaganda that is perpetrated through the medical journals, agencies, public health institutions, and the media is the worst, right? Anytime you hear any journalist from mainstream media talk about vaccines, you just see these repeated, and I'm just calling them lies. It's propaganda, but they're literally lies. And I do believe, though, that the journalist writing those articles actually believes what they're writing, but those are falsehoods perpetrated by medical journals. This idea that there's no association between autism and vaccine is beyond absurd, but you can find plenty of papers that claim that, right? And you can find plenty of so-called experts and public health authorities who dismiss the idea entirely as a conspiracy theory, not supported by the literature. So, I mean, those lies, yes, I agree. It's not only just the money and whatnot, but to try to pretend that it's for our benefit and they actually care about us, you're absolutely right. It's absurd. And anyone who believes that, by the way, I think I believed that before COVID. So I don't want to put people down who believe that. I mean, I've talked about this many times. Prior to COVID, I had an implicit faith and trust in the institutions of society and in the institutions of society. I really did.
As did I.
And COVID exposed and uncovered a scope and a scale of lies, deception, manipulation that I never thought existed, and I think this movie does a really good job of illustrating that path that's happened to a lot of us. Like if you woke up, Steve, and you knew more than most of us prior to this. If you had some awakening to do, imagine how far I've come.
Yeah, I mean, I did too. I've worked for, I've had Todd working for me, my editor, for a decade. And I just thought he was just kind of part of a kooky little subset and didn't bother me any, because I'm vaccinated. So why do I care if the guy next to me isn't vaccinated? Because if the vaccines work, I shouldn't care what the person next to me is doing, right? So it didn't bother me, And then we get to this thing called COVID. And the thing that, we all have the tipping point moment when the scales fell off our eyes during that era. For me, it was what they did to natural immunity. All right, that was the thing to me. It's a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's a scam, so-called natural immunity. Okay, and that's when that to me was the moment when I said, hell no. That was kind of that moment for me.
Steve, can I just say that I've said that same thing. Like, I'll never forget. Actually, there was two moments for me where the first one was when I scratched my head, and the second one was when I exploded. But the first one was when I heard on the radio that they were restricting hydroxychloroquine to the hospitalized patients only, which was the most dumbest thing I've ever heard. I mean, even if it did work or didn't work, you would want to give it within days of symptoms, not a week and a half. And so I thought that was just so
when it's that acute. When it's so acute that you're already at the ER. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make sense to give it 8 days into an illness, right? And then that's just like you said, when I found out that the FDA put up a page on their website saying that there's no role in checking antibodies before vaccination, basically eliminating the value of natural immunity, someone who just recovered. I was like, when have we ever done that? That now something's really wrong. Why are they doing that? And I just want to finish on that answer, by the way. Something just really shook me yesterday. I saw a clip of an interview of Tucker Carlson with like a former CIA agent. And he was talking about like there's 20 different hallmarks of a PSYOP, psychological operations, a program or whatever. And he said one of the most, inarguable and defining characteristics of a PSYOP is when they suppress disagreements or counter narratives or dissent. And he talked about like COVID, those of us who had like the most reasonable argued, some of us were some of the highest credentialed people in the country, right? With his doctors from Harvard, you had Kuldorff, you had Bhattacharya, you had, all these big names in science. Not that I was a big name, but I was highly credentialed. We were saying totally reasonable things, and boy, were we getting destroyed for it. And, it just shows you that whole thing was totally manufactured in a PSYOP. And I knew, just because it violated so many scientific principles, like almost everything they were doing were unscientific. And I was getting tired of it, and I tried to call it out and got punished for it, but I'll do it again.
Well, thank you for everything you did, brother. It's always good to talk to you. Where can people go and see this film? Which I think you guys made this in 23 originally, right?
Yeah.
But it's more pertinent now. Yeah, it's more pertinent now Okay.
I'm sorry,
it's more pertinent now with Bobby Kennedy taking over.
Yeah, I do think so too, and I think not only I like that you said that, Steve. It's more pertinent, and I think it's probably going to be more impactful because of what you and I just talked about. There's so many more of us who are awake, or if we're fully awake, we're starting to question heavily what happened. And I think this movie for those people will bring them along a huge way. And I really hope people come out and watch it.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Kory. Always good to talk to you, brother. Thank you again.
Awesome. Great to see you, Steve.
You bet. Good to see you too. Todd, I got to guess you've got a quick thought or two about that conversation here in the 30 seconds we have left.
The fact that he's a doctor, and I said this to him personally, and he's giving his medical profession permission to put the magical power of vaccines, which his industry is addicted to as much as anybody. They were never taught. They were just told to accept. It's so important that he's saying these things out loud.
Indeed, we're coming back with hour 2, and we are going to pack a wallop with this Theology Thursday. We don't duck the hard questions. Stay tuned for that next. All right, back here with hour 2, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I'm Steve Deace. I've got one more hour down here in beautiful Dallas. Enjoyed the last 5 days, getting some warmth, and I'm coming back home to Des Moines just in time because it's going to be fairly warm there as well. Right after today's show, I got to got to catch an Uber and get to the airport to head home. So Todd and Aaron are going to do 3 non-political questions with Anastasia today without me in the overtime. You can also let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. That's Steve at stevedeace.com. DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Also, don't forget to subscribe, please, to our new YouTube channel, at Deace Show on YouTube. That's at Deace Show on YouTube. And then if you are a podcast listener, please do a couple things for us. If you haven't done it already, hit subscribe or on iTunes follow, and that'll make sure every time we do a new episode, it shows up in your feed right there every single time. And then if you like the show, if you dig it, if you think it's got a good beat and you can dance to it, leave us a 5-star review. And thank you to all of you that have done that for us, too. We appreciate each and every one. as we appreciate now, after it's been a couple of years, I kind of feel like we're long-term partners in this thing. And that's our friends over at Deace Medical. First of all, they want to thank all the first responders that have been there for us over the last few months, whether it's been what's happened in Western Carolina, the fires in LA, snowstorms, intense weather. Sometimes it's easy to forget about those that put their lives on the line for us to save their fellow Americans. But here's the thing we need to also remember. They can't be everywhere all at once. And when it comes to emergencies, the thing you need to remember about that is that really you have to be, to some degree, your own first responder. And one of the most important tools to have in your kit along those lines, it's the Deace case. I cannot recommend the Deace case highly enough if you're the type of person who wants to be prepared for that could never happen to me when it finally does happen to me. If that's you, you absolutely want to have one of these in your home. The Deace case is a personalized emergency kit that contains essential antibiotics and medications that treat the most common and deadly infections. Were you just listening to the interview we did with Dr. Pierre Kory about how much trust has been lost in public health after what's happened the last few years? Yet, you still care about your public health so you can be seen in public. All right. You need to be healthy. All right. So get the Deace case. It provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use, and you can expand it to their ever-growing menu of medications as well to customize it to what you want, including ivermectin. See, that's what got Dr. Kory originally in trouble back in the day, is he was successfully treating patients in Madison, Wisconsin with ivermectin, and you weren't supposed to save those lives. You're supposed to let them die. That's literally what happened to him. That's how he got started. That's how a former liberal named Pierre Kory found out about a show by a guy who puts the fun in fundamentalism named Steve Deace. That's what happened. All right. So that's not a unique story. That's kind of the MAGA Maha synergy that we've seen over the last year plus. All right. So if you want to go to Deace.com, they still have that giveaway going, by the way, where you can get a free Deace case at Deace.com. So you can go there, JASE, and enter for the giveaway. And you can purchase your own Deace case as well. And if you use my last name, Deace, as your promo code, you get a discount on your order. Promo code Deace at Deace.com, JASE, promo code Deace at Deace.com. All right, gentlemen, are we ready for some Theology Thursday?
You bet.
Who knows?
Well, we're going to see how this goes because we've got some doozy of questions. And listen, man, if we didn't want the smoke, right, guys? If we didn't want this smoke, we probably shouldn't have agreed to study the book of Romans, right? That's kind of inherent. You're talking about maybe the most intense, theologically dense, rich, robust epistle in all of the New Testament. So if we didn't want this kind of smoke, then we should have never taken this on. And that's why a lot of the kind of pastors I was talking about in the first hour won't take this book on. They don't want that smoke. And I know what's going to happen, by the way. All the pastors in our audience that are doing their jobs, not all of them, but several of them, are going to be the ones that email me. They'll say, hey, man, here was my message last week. Here's what we do in our church. Again, guys, I wasn't talking about you. If I'm listening to somebody's show and they're like, man, I got to tell you, I've just run into too many Steves who are just terrible, terrible people. I don't feel compelled like I've got to email and call in and say, hey, I'm still married to the same woman and my kids don't hate me. I mean, I wasn't. That's you. I got you. I wasn't talking about you. There's just not enough of you. So it's the ones that don't want to email. Those are the ones I'm talking about because they knew I was talking about them. All right, you guys ready to go? Let's go with David first. Let's just start off with a doozy here. Let's not even ease our way into this, amen? Let's just go right up. Let's not wait till Mariano Rivera comes out of the bullpen in the 9th inning. Let's put him on the mound to start the game. Let's face that cutter the very first pitch of the game. Let's just go right for it, all right? David writes, the doctrine of the Trinity, as I understand it, was canonized long after the apostles died. Well, first and foremost, with respect, David, you already understand it wrong, but I will continue your note. There is nowhere I find in Scripture that establishes the Trinity. Jesus never spoke of it clearly, or even in inference by several parables. True, it could be inferred, but it's not so specific that it reveals some kind of mystery. I have heard the doctrine of the Trinity was adopted more as an olive branch to unify the polytheist of Greece and monotheist of Judea. You're right, because we had a real big, huge success of taking lots of non-Messianic Jews into the faith. That worked out great. Lots of them joined. They didn't, actually. A lot of them didn't. So that didn't happen. Anyway, Jesus prayed to the Father in the garden, the symbol of the dove at his baptism of the Holy Ghost. It is clear to me from John that he, Jehovah, was in the beginning. Christ is our advocate with the Father, resurrected, perfect in form, shape, and spirit, just as his Father is as well. We are commanded to be perfect, and with the atonement and grace, I am whole and made perfect by the blood of Christ. Thanks again. Very much enjoy your show and the team. You won't offend me. I've asked many ministers and scholars, and I never seem to get a rationale other than this is the mystery of God and not a mistake caused by Adam's transgression. Well, David, thank you for coming to us, because clearly the pastors you went to previously suck. So I'm going to take this kind of point by point, guys, and then I'm going to hand it off to you and do with it what you will. You guys okay with that?
You bet.
All right. So the doctrine of the Trinity, as I understand it, he says, was canonized long after the apostles died. The apostles baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The apostles baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So
we're done here, right?
Soteriological. Yeah, I was actually tempted to just end it there, as a matter of fact, Todd. I was tempted to end it there. But we've got an hour to fill, and I don't want to be snotty because David's asking a good question. That is, listen, this has been hotly debated. Guys, we've had entire enclaves and councils over this. All right. Every heresy, guys. Every heresy in the history of the Christian church, every single one has attacked the Trinity. Usually not head on. Usually at attacking with the divinity of Christ, that Jesus is God. Trying to say Jesus was not God. He was a son of God, a prophet of God, but that he was not God incarnate. In the New Testament, towards the end, we are introduced by the Apostle John, and I do find it ironic that David wants to quote from John to say there's no Trinity. John's epistle is the most Trinitarian of them all. He literally he mirrors the language of creation. And in the beginning, John begins, like in the beginning, Genesis does, and applies it all to Christ and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. The Word was God, and the Word became flesh. What's the name of that flesh? What's the name? Jesus. Frankly, to reject the Trinity, you actually have to reject the entire Gospel of John. You have to remove John from the Gospels because it's the most explicitly Trinitarian of all of them. But the apostles baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Why? Well, you went on to say, David, Jesus never spoke of it clearly, except when he did. When he looked at the apostles and said, baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says, I and the Father are one. Numerous times in the New Testament, in the book of John, Jesus looks at Jews and refers to himself as I am. Why does he use that expression? Why not just say, myself? Here's what I think. Why specifically use the phrase I am? Because when God appeared to Moses at the burning bush, guys, and Moses says, well, who should I tell the people sent me? What does God say? What does God say to tell the people they should refer to him as? I am. Tell him I am sent you. That's why they wanted to kill him. They knew what he was saying. He was claiming to be God. That's why they went after him. They understood, because if he's not, here's the thing. If he's not God, he should have been stoned to death, and it was a blasphemer. It is frank. Should we you guys want to get into real trouble on this question today? You guys ready for this? Should we just really go for it? Should we really go for it today? I'm in the mood. You ready? Yep. You guys up for this?
Yes.
Okay. A Jew who denies that Christ was God is actually more theologically consistent than a Christian who claims otherwise. Because the Jew is actually claiming a position that is possibly true. The Christian who claims to be, but denies the divinity of Christ, is claiming a position that cannot possibly be true. Because there's only two options. Jesus clearly claimed to be God. Paul wrote an entire letter called Colossians. We studied it. The first time we did a Bible study on our church, verse by verse, was several years ago. We did Colossians to answer these very questions. And in that book, Paul takes themes from John's epistle and applies them more broadly in what's called a Christology, or the theology of Christ. Now, why would Christ need his own theology? What kind of beings need their own theology, Todd and Aaron? Do you know? Who would need a theology? Do we need a theology of Aaron? Aaron, do you need your own theology?
No.
He did get 100%
you know why you don't need a theology
score, though.
That's why he knows the answer to that, Todd. That's why he knows the answer. Okay? So he doesn't get a theology because he's not a theo. You know who gets theologies? Theos, or those claiming to be. They get theologies. Non-theos, or people not claiming to be theos, don't get their own theologies. Theos get theologies. The root word of theology is what? Theo. So theology means study. What are we studying? God. That's what we're studying. Study of God. So there's only two options. Jesus clearly claims to be God. That is why the Jews, recognizing that if he's not God, if he's not Messiah, he's a blasphemer. They were correct, actually, in one sense. They were correct. What they weren't right about is that he was actually telling them the truth. He was their Messiah. But if he wasn't their Messiah, then their instincts to stone him were actually proper and according to the law. Someone saying, I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in the divinity of Christ, has a much stickier wicket theologically. That camel's nose is, that camel's way harder to get and thread through a needle than the Jew who says he wasn't God, therefore we should reject him. That's actually the intellectually consistent position. I believe it is wrong. I think it is eternally wrong, and I'm betting my own soul on it. But intellectually, it's the consistent one. To say that he is not God, but I'm just going to forget and ignore all the times that he claimed to be otherwise, but he's my Lord, that's the position that's not consistent. That doesn't hold water. That won't hold up. He doesn't give you that option. So that means you essentially are forcing yourself to edit Jesus. Or you think you have found Jesus' editor who came along later, much later in some cases after him. You're not given that option. That option is not presentable. He clearly claims to be God. Clearly. It's not even a debatable point. I and the Father are one. I am at least 7 times in the Gospel of John. And then later, John reinforces this point in one of his final words of the New Testament. And we come across this term that's very well known even amongst unbelievers. The term that he uses is Antichrist. It's the only time it's used in the entire Scripture. Now, who does John say are Antichrists? Those who deny the incarnation, that God came in the flesh, that Jesus came in the flesh. Those who deny the incarnation. That God, while still being God, became a man. Fully man and fully God. Those are antichrists, John says. You are not permitted within Christian theology. You are not permitted the position that Jesus is not God, but I'm a Christian. That he doesn't offer you that option. He accepted the worship of his apostles. They watched his ascension into heaven. He told them all authority on earth, on heaven and earth has been granted to me. He doesn't give that option. So your only option is the non-Messianic Jews were correct. He's not God, therefore he should be rejected all out. I think they're wrong, but they're intellectually consistent. Or he is God, and God came in the flesh. Those are your only 2 theological options. There's not a middle one. And to claim a middle one means you have to claim that someone came to you or you came to yourself and claim that they have the authority to edit Christ's own words later, and in some cases, many, many years later. What else did I want to say about this real quick? you know what? I'm going to leave it there. I think I've said enough. Todd and Aaron, you guys have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, mine is more of the historical narrative. When you say your understanding is that this was a olive branch to the Greeks, etc., there's no doubt that the Greek logical mindset was pervasive throughout the world. But that's where that ends. Whether you read about this from any legitimate Catholic or Protestant side, the two issues spoken about the most for hundreds, olive branch just makes it seem like, we got to check this box so we can move on to other things. The things that were most debated within Christian circles, and it's not even close, certainly up until the time of Constantine, and it continues on, is the Trinity and the hypostatic union, and it's not because of some box checking or even some stubborn eggheadedness. It was a love affair. And ironically brought on by the Holy Spirit. When Steve talks about, I gots to know, the early church, in the midst of being persecuted for their belief, they didn't want to hide their light under a bush. They had to know. This was the greatest gift possible to all mankind, the fullness of truth. So I read not only better pastors, but read better books. Because people wanted to go deep on this stuff, and they didn't always get it right. And all the way to 1,000 years later, ultimately this whole thing with the Trinity and the Holy Spirit, that was the straw that broke the camel's back between East and West. The whole filioque controversy, whether the Holy Spirit proceeds just from God alone or from the love of the Father and the Son. But this is all born out of a deep, deep desire. Be like children, a children's denier. Dr. Strange, show me everything. I feel sad that you've been given such a forfeit version of the study of the greatest story ever told.
Yes, I'm glad you went there, Todd, because I want to kind of flesh that out in a little different way. So this idea that the concept of the Trinity was invented ex nihilo, out of nothing, in order to appease or synthesize differences between Greeks, polytheists, let's just say that, Greek thinking, and monotheists. So let me get this straight. The early church, some of whom fresh off of witnesses to great wonders, miracles, thanks to not only Christ himself, but the apostles, persecuted viciously, fresh off the heels of some of those same apostles getting brutally murdered for their faith, beating all the odds to continue to grow exponentially in the face of this great persecution. And the response is, you know what we need? We need a way to make this thing called Christianity more palatable. That's your argument? That's dumb. That's just dumb. But sometimes getting uncomfortable, the thought of getting uncomfortable makes us dumb. I think a good axiom for the Christian walk is get comfortable being uncomfortable, whether that's in your day-to-day life, whether that's spiritually, and on this issue, intellectually. The Trinity is not a contradiction. It's a mystery, but that makes us sometimes intellectually uncomfortable. That sometimes we have to admit to ourselves, our feeble minds, our human minds, just cannot comprehend certain things. This is why you see so many people try to make analogies, try to make analogs to the Trinity. You cannot do it. You cannot. You should not do it, because any analogy that you make will be imperfect, and the Trinity. Everybody knows the Trinity is imperfect. No, we're talking about the Godhead here, perfection. So yes, I think what drives this sometimes is an inability or unwillingness to intellectually give ourselves over to God and the Holy Spirit. And that's very dangerous. And by the way, I've thought about this. I've thought this through as well. And it's like, man, it'd be really cool if we could come up with a great note. But I just thought of a great note. Analogy note. No. It's a mystery. And that's okay.
The nature of it is a mystery, is what you're trying to say.
Correct.
The nature of it is a mystery. Yeah. And I think that's maybe where there was a conflation from some of the pastors maybe that David talked to. The nature of how the relationship works within the Trinity is a mystery. The doctrine of it is not a mystery. And I think David is conflating those two things. And we need to define the term hypostatic union, by the way, since Todd, you referenced it. And tell me if you guys are okay with this. It's essentially a nice theological term for Jesus is both fully God and fully man. Is that simple enough to understand? Are we good with that?
Yep.
Yes.
And so then Steve, why did he submit to his Father? He set his divinity aside. Right? Paul writes this. He set his divinity aside. Right? Modeling, all right, servant leadership. Right? He's modeling servant leadership, the term that I used last hour in another context. He's modeling servant leadership. He sets his divinity aside, all right, in order to model submission to the Father. But then he also says to his disciples, why do you call me Lord if you do not what? Do what I say. So he's both fully God and fully man. There's never a moment when he's not fully God. In his sovereignty, he chooses to set his divine attributes at times aside in order to model for us servanthood, submission to the Father as a man or just as a human. But again, every heresy that the church has ever confronted, and I mean ever, has either began with saying Jesus is not God, vis-a-vis the Trinity isn't true, or it eventually ended up there. Every single one. There's never been a heresy in the history of the church that did not include either a forward or a back-end attempt to diminish the Trinity. So what does that tell you then? If every heresy in the history of the church has included some attempt to diminish the Trinity or to attack it or to redefine it, you know a tree by its fruit. Why does the enemy attack that particular doctrine or the idea that Jesus is God? Why? Not a God, not a son of God, God. Why does that get attacked so very often? That would seem to indicate it is a fundamental fact that puts everything else in its proper context. I mean, you waste your time attacking things that you don't think are fundamentally matter. Anything else on this topic?
I think we're good.
All right. We're up against the break. Let's see if we can squeeze this in anyway.
No.
Here we are. You don't think we can squeeze this one in?
Maybe reading it.
Think we can squeeze? All right. Let's do this. Let's skip ahead to Tyler's because that's a short question. Tyler Fuller wants to know, why do you believe most churches nowadays do not preach on the wrath of God and just the goodness of what God can do? Because they're interested in reaching customers and not discipling converts. That's why. Ultimately, that's why. They can come up with any other motivations or anything else they want, but that's essentially why. And they've been corporatized. In a corporate ethos, the customer is always right. That's not the way it works in the church. In fact, do you know, folks, how many times in the New Testament Christ continues to pursue those who have rejected him? Do you guys know back there in Des Moines how many times that happens?
Guessing it's a low number.
Really, I mean, like the lowest one. It's the lowest one. Zilch. Never happens once. Never happens one time. Not once. And much of the American church ethos is to continue going after people that will reject God over and over again. Well, that's marketing. You're trying to build a brand.
We did a whole special on the verses you're not allowed to talk about at church, and I think we got a lot of good feedback on that. Remember, I say all the time we're too comfortable, but I also say, and this is a version of this as it applies to the church, we have a rated R faith, and they don't want to be honest with you about that.
Yeah, you brought up a great, and I think you invoked this earlier in the show. You brought up a great, or kind of an analog on X recently responding to a similar question in that churches have adopted the Christian radio model of reaching people, and
uplifting and
hope-filled. There's a reason why that sounds like an advertisement for a bra. I'm serious. That's absolutely correct. In the secular model of like broadcasting, the sun of the solar system is the audience. They are the center of the universe. And you are supposed to reflect whatever they want to see back to them. What we are called to do as Christ followers is treat the center of the universe as the sun, S-O-N, and reflect that back to all the other planets orbiting in the solar system. That's what we're supposed to do. But that's a hard thing to do because in our fallen nature, we are the center of the world. We are the center of the universe. Churches have fallen into that corporatized, as you just said, model. So they're reflecting everything that their audience wants back to them. Just with some nice Christian jargon mixed in. There's a nice term for this that was invented not too long ago. Moralistic therapeutic deism. That's what it is. It's not a new phenomenon.
Marketing takes something that people may want, and marketing comes to you in terms of what you want, to the point of then you think you need it. Okay? Evangelism comes to you with what people need, and when effective, then realize that you want it. Completely different paradigm. A completely different paradigm. And many times in life, the things we need, we don't initially want. Otherwise, we wouldn't need them. We'd already have them. I don't need another shirt that looks like this. I already have one. I don't need another watch that keeps up my blood pressure and heart rate. I've got one. I may want another one, but I don't need it. I've already got one and it works just fine. More questions next. Back here on the Steve Deace Show, anytime you've got to make a big change in life, it can be hard. That is especially true when you're trying to buy, sell, or home in these unprecedented times.
Bing.
And what makes it still unprecedented? Well, folks, we haven't had a real estate market in like 5 years. Between COVID and Let's Go Brandon, there almost has been no semblance of a real estate market in this country for going on 5 years. Right? So we're trying to get this kick-started again. And that's where you need an agent you can trust to walk you through, because a lot's changed since the last time we had this thing called the real estate market. All right. Where are you going to find an agent you can trust? Well, the name says it all. realestateagentsitrust.com. A lot of times, if you go there, you're going to get introduced to an agent that's from right here in the Blaze audience. So, they share values with you as well. We have verified their track record of success. Otherwise, we wouldn't recommend them to you. So whether you're trying to get across town, across the state, across the country, ultimately where you need to get to is across the finish line with the conclusion of what in even the best of times can be a stressful process. All right, so let's relieve a good deal of that stress with an agent you can trust at realestateagentsitrust.com. Head over there right now. Again, that is realestateagentsitrust.com. All right, let's get to a couple of other Theology Thursday questions. This is from Eric with an A, who says, Romans is one of my favorite books in the Bible. What an amazing treatise over so many topics vital to the way of the Christian walk. I fell in love with it in my home group study, but I'm getting such great value from you guys' walk through it. So thank you. And thank you for that, Eric. We appreciate it. I completely agree with your recent comment that staying in the race and finishing it is the key. I don't think there are tiers of salvation based on works, no platinum tier saint, so to speak, reward level. But Matthew 20 makes it explicitly clear that all called are rewarded the same. Our infinite debt of sin is paid in full by him alone. However, I have two other references I hope I could get you guys' thoughts on. 1 Corinthians 9:24, this sounds somewhat like placing in the race and trying to earn a better position in heaven. And second, Matthew 6:19 through 21, again, are we to put these treasures in some heavenly account that will greater bless us in eternity? That doesn't seem right to me. I appreciate any unraveling of this ministry you guys could help with. P.S., your show and Phil Robertson's were instrumental in my coming to the Lord. I came to the Family Leader Conference in 2022 to see your nefarious teaser. I heard some things that really sparked my journey to God, and I'm eternally grateful for his light that you guys have reflected, and that I now have opportunities to be his ambassador as well. So, Eric, first of all, brother, let's not bury the lead here. That's the most important thing that you wrote. So, thank you. That's the most important thing any of us have said on this show. All right, is what you just said right there. And again, as we've said before, when we get those that kind of feedback, that's our favorite kind of feedback. It's why we do what we do and why we do it the way that we do it. All right, so thank you, brother, for that encouragement. And I can't hear just speaking for me, but I'm sure Todd and Aaron would agree. I can't hear that enough. All right, man, that is catnip for my soul. It is. It's the greatest feedback we can have to know that we are on mission. All right, so thank you for that, Eric, and finish the race now. Now you get to finish the race now that you started it. So when I was speaking about this recently, I was speaking strictly in a salvationary or soteriological. And again, soteriology is the study of salvation, okay, as a science. How are human beings saved, redeemed from our sins, okay? So I was speaking strictly in a soteriological concept that salvation is a pass-fail exercise, okay? Let me give an analogy, though, okay? So that doesn't mean the kingdom of heaven is a pass-fail exercise. It's a meritocracy. Let me give an analogy before I try to explain it in kingdom sense. In my family, in my family, as one of my children, where I am father and I have dominion, small d, in my family where I have children and I have dominion, I love them all the same. All right. There is no in the race for my love. There is no first, second, or third place. I love them all the same, but I don't treat them all the same. There might be times, particularly when they were younger, they misbehave. Not Anna, of course, because she's coming on after me and she'll be in a position to bury me in the overtime, so I'm going to say very nice things. Perfect child. All right? But there were times that they might misbehave. There might be times now that they've gotten older. They have their own opinions, and we have arguments, and we don't get along. All right? So the position of how I treat them as their father ebbs and flows. But the conviction of my love for them does not. When it comes to the kingdom, salvation is a pass-fail exercise. If you finish the race, you pass. If you didn't, or never got into it in the first place, you didn't. That's it. Now, in the kingdom, and Paul alludes to crowns in his writings, that's what I think you're referring to from 1 Corinthians chapter 9. There are crowns based on the level of faithfulness that you have demonstrated. And you see this now in the parable of the talents. Right? So the master gives everyone a set of talents. Then he returns for the reckoning, which is symbolic of the return of Christ. And he goes to those that he gave talents to. Right? So everyone within the sound of my voice, right, that loves the Lord Jesus Christ is loved by him just the same. But we're not all being treated the same. Some of us are backslidden. Some of us are thinking about becoming backslidden. Some of us have some bad ideas. Some of us have some really good ones. Some of us want to pursue things that he knows are not good for us. And that may not even be immoral. Hey, yesterday, Amy and I saw a house. We're not even looking for a house. We love where we live. Just came upon something. Let me give you just a personal example. Came upon something just accidentally, and we were like, wow. And that is in a price range where we can more than justify it. And it was a beautiful home. It's been for sale for 6 months because, again, like I said a minute ago, there's not a housing market. We have no real estate market. And it's being sold dirt cheap for the quality of house it is. And we start playing with it and toying with the idea, running numbers. We even looked up what we owe on the current house, what it would cost. Keep in mind, we just renovated the entire main level. We have this. If you walk into our house now, the family room, Amy has constructed this like beautiful wall, which is a collage of pictures of the family from the beginning with her and me to the kids all the way through their childhood, grown, the grandchild now with more to come. It's just stunning when you see it at the house, what she did. But in the moment, we're not thinking about any of that. This house is nice. It's nicer than one we have, and it's a pretty good bargain. And the moment you start playing around with it, even called my realtor buddy Scott last night. Hey man, what do you think we get for our home? And can we see that one? I jump in the shower this morning because we're talking about it again. And I said this overwhelming conviction, I'm pretty sure was from the Lord, like that house is not for you. That house is not for you. Stay where you are and await further instructions. I got out of the shower and I said to Aim, honey, I think the Lord doesn't want us to go after that house. I think we're just supposed to stay where we are. She was like, okay. That'll be the last time we ever discuss it. Now, if I had not listened to the Lord there and just kept pursuing it, he might have treated me differently, put some other things in my path to make it harder and more difficult for me to do something that clearly was not his plan for my wife and I until he got our attention. Doesn't mean he loves us any less, but we're not doing what he wanted us to do. So we're getting treated differently than another married couple who is. So if you're in covenant with God, you're all loved the same, but you're not all going to be treated the same. Maybe the greatest sports coach of all time, John Wooden said, the greatest way to show partiality is to treat everybody the same. They're not all the same. Bill Walton's not the same as the 11th guy on the bench. The 11th guy on the bench is happy to be there. Bill Walton is a transcendent figure who went 21 out of 22 in the NCAA championship game shooting the basketball once. So they're not the same. They're the same. They have maybe the same value, but they're not this. They should not be treated the same. They're not the same. The guy that's the 11th player on the bench is not owed everything that Bill Walton is. They're owed the same basic dignity, but he's not, in this context, he's not the same. Everyone who loves the Lord within the sound of my voice is treated the same as me, or is loved the same as me, but you weren't treated the same. Most of you cannot step in here and do what I do. However, I also can't step in and do what most of you do. We're not the same in terms of how we're treated, the talents we're given, but we're loved the same. And so there's a meritocracy, therefore, also in what we do with the talents and abilities we are given. And the goal is to multiply that talent, not to hide it, not to be fearful of failing it. And Jesus says, when I return, and the one that did that says that to me, cast him out into the outer darkness, where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth, that wicked servant. Don't be that guy. You don't want to be the guy that just walks in. Hey, I did the bare minimum to get in here. Who's proud of that? Who's motivated by that? Thanks for the eternal fire insurance. I did basics. I went to church every Sunday, never got off the road. Yeah, I heard my well done, good and faithful servant. That's great, but I did nothing with the talents and abilities that you gave me. I didn't try to bring anybody else into the kingdom with me, starting with my own family. Why would you do that? What is it about your Lord that made you think half-assing it was kind of what he did to get you to even have a chance here?
Now we're over the target.
Well,
There we are.
I mean, where did he just kind of just say, hey, Father, I'm about 100 yards from Golgotha. Can I just put this thing down now? We've done this. We've gone far enough, don't you think? Point's been made. Dude went all the way. All the way. All the way. He's God. He could have just said, you know what, on second thought, the first nail through that hand hurt so bad, I'm going to go ahead and pull rank here. We don't need to do another one. First one was bad enough. Took them both. And in the feet next. So why in the world would you be contemplating ever, what's the bare minimum asked of me here? And I frankly ask, and any father would ask this of his children, and any coach would ask this of his players, and any boss would ask this of his employees. What is it about me and what I'm offering you that makes you even contemplate that question? Why do you even want to be here then if all you want is the bare minimum? That's why he says that's a wicked servant and get out of here. You want the bare minimum? So we're all loved the same within the covenant, but we are not all treated the same. It is a meritocracy where that is concerned. You guys want to add anything to that? Or disagree, if you prefer.
I mean, you were nice and took the question at its meta level first, which is where it wanted to go. But I'm wondering if this person understands or is afraid to ask on the level where you've ultimately brought it home, which is you're way too comfortable, it's time to smash all your idols level, because that's what both of these passages that you yourself bring up to us, they're both ultimately about idol smashing. I mean, he's talking about running a race. He says, well, I know what running a race looks like, and see these guys, they train, they put in the work. Do you have that standard for yourself in the faith? And then treasures in heaven. I see you got all this stuff, cool stuff, whatever. Do you work on the level to get it? Do you cherish it as much? This is all about idols and how they own us, and that we are not allowed to have anything that competes with the race to heaven or the treasures in heaven. And we need that lesson in this moment, in this time, in this space more than ever.
So when you buy your home, when you purchase a new vehicle, heck, when you become old enough that, hey, you're in a position in life where you think it might be a wise thing to get life insurance. When you wake up in the morning, do you check those insurance policies? Do you just read them through, spend time meditating on all of the fine print, then spend more time meditating? How can I think and do more for my insurance policy this morning? No, it's insurance. It's back of mind, gotta have it. Sometimes wise to have it. It's insurance. It's not, you don't live your life for insurance. Salvation is not just fire insurance. It's not just insurance. Yet so many people live their lives who claim the name of Christ, at least on some level, as if this thing called the Christian walk is in the back of their mind like some insurance policy. No, it's not even a lifestyle change. That's cheapening it. It is your life. Should be your life.
Correct.
I think we have a tendency to, not a tendency, it is the human condition. What can I do? Can I do the bare minimum and get the maximum result? No. No, you cannot.
What's my ROAS?
Correct.
What's my ROI?
Yes. No, you cannot. So yes, the sense that Paul is talking about when it's coming to running a race or like a marathon, do most people, are they capable of running first place at the Boston Marathon? Probably not. The reward is crossing the finish line. That is the goal. The goal is not just crossing the finish line, it's keeping running, it's keeping going. So yes, in that sense, that is the corporate reward that you're talking about, Steve. But I think most of these questions are motivated by a place of, hey, I'm not really doing, and I'm not saying the emailers that do not get that
no, but the questions he's raising
are usually raised from a motivation of, I'm not really sure I'm giving the most to my Creator, Am I still okay? That's a dangerous game to play. And that's putting it mildly.
If I were in a harsher part of the world, I would be emphasizing the love and mercy of Christ way more than I am to this audience, because we have a tendency to be challenged in our faith by our cultural conditions because we're in this flesh, okay? And so if I'm in a harsher part of the world where the comforts that are available to us today are, that we take for granted, are, uncomprehensive luxuries, then I'm going to emphasize to that group more the love and graciousness and kindness of Christ to endure to the end, to get to that experience where you'll get that reward at the end. Because suffering to them is called a day that ends in Y. It's called I got up tomorrow, or I got up this morning. But in our world, we're good with the idea that there's some kind of reward for us. In fact, many of us are born thinking we're entitled to it. What we need now is to be reminded that God is also a righteous judge in this part of the world. That's why we tend to emphasize that more here on our show. It's a course correct from our cultural biases. All right, man, I'm heading back home to Des Moines. Reunited tomorrow in studio, DEI willing on the plane with Todd and Aaron. All right, everybody have a great day. See you tomorrow. Until then, Romans 8:28.